My name is Bob Pollin. I'm a professor of economics here at the University of Massachusetts, and I'm co-director of the Political Economy Research Institute, PERI. PERI has been around now for 15 years, since 1998, and I'm the founding co-director along with my colleague and good friend Jerry Epstein. And when we started it, the idea was to create a research institute within with a university framework that maintained very high research standards, academic standards, but that was also clearly committed to using that research for progressive political ends. So that's basically what we've been doing ever since.
When you say progressive ends, you mean an economic analysis that looks at the costs and benefits to the vast majority of people?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I had a professor myself in graduate school who was a pretty renowned economist named Robert Heilbronner. He had a great quote, if I can say it right. He says, so long a source of mystification, economics can best be understood as the tool by which we strive to make a workable science out of morality. So I think that's the way I think about what we try to do here.
Wow. I think that's exceptional
Yeah.
right now.
He was a great thinker, yeah.
Well, the primary reason that we're doing this interview today is because there are groups of people around this country who are trying to stop drone warfare. And not just because of the attacks, although that's the main cause right now, but because the drone technology is leading us into a place where the humans are going to be more and more taken away from direct warfare, but the warfare can have profound and really, at this moment, not completely known effects on huge populations in terms of privacy, their safety, and how resources are going to be controlled and who's going to benefit. So there are a lot of reasons people are interested in this. But to come down to the point that we're dealing with as we speak with people around the United States about drone construction, drone research, drone bases, is people say to us, regardless of what you're talking about, and they might be concerned about privacy or death, but these drone industry elements bring us jobs. Now, what do we, as people who are concerned about the drone industry, say to them when they say it makes us jobs, so that's it?
Well, I'll start out by saying they're right. You invest in building drones, it takes humans to build drones, even though drones themselves are the epitome of a tool of warfare that does not itself require humans to be on the battlefield, risking their lives. They can kill other people without risking any other lives on the offensive. But the act of building a drone, of course, requires people.
Right.
It does create jobs.
Okay.
But that's not the relevant question.
Okay.
That is not the relevant question. If what we care about in terms of jobs is we have to recognize that when you spend money doing anything, you create jobs. Anything at all.
All right.
Building drones, building conventional weapons, bringing food to a military base, all creates jobs.
Okay.
Putting in oil rigs, building the Keystone Pipeline, fracking for natural gas creates jobs. All of those things create jobs. But so do a lot of other things. Spending on education, spending on healthcare, spending on the green economy and fighting climate change, which is so imperative. That also creates jobs. Now, from the standard of job creation, therefore the relevant question is, how many jobs? We have to have a comparable metric. for a given $1 million of spending, for example, how many jobs do you get per $1 million of expenditure? Not just that it creates jobs.
Right.
So the relevant question is, just to give you some basics.
Yep.
If you spend $1 million in the military today, these are statistics that we generate off of US government figures. You create about 11 jobs per $1 million of expenditure in the military.
Okay.
Okay?
11 jobs.
11 jobs per $1 million of spending. If you spend the same $1 million in education in this country, you create 27 jobs. So you create 2.5 times more jobs per $1 million of expenditure by putting money into education than having it go into the military, including drones.
Okay.
And this is actually a very relevant comparison for today, because when we're talking about the sequestration and the cuts to social spending versus military spending, it's, you know, a lot of the social spending is going to be cut from funds going to state and local governments. State and local governments basically spend on 3 things: education, health, public safety.
Okay.
So we are going to see big cuts in education. And the people that are against the sequestration because they think it's going to hurt the military are saying, well, it's bad for jobs. Actually, put the money into education and you would get way more jobs.
Okay. And could you just explain, what does the term sequestration mean?
Sequestration is basically a fancy way of saying cuts. It's not exactly cuts.
All right.
The reason
It's holding money back.
Yes, that was otherwise had already been planned.
Right.
So, I mean, if we want to think about the military budget, the military budget as of now is about 4.7% of US GDP.
Okay.
As recently as the year 2000, it was only 3% of US GDP. That's a difference of 1.7% of GDP, but that's about $270 billion difference in today's economy.
In other words, that much more of our overall resources
is going
into the military
than it did just 10
Right.
or
Okay.
13 years ago.
Right.
Now, you could say, well, yeah, but we had the Iraq War and we had the Afghanistan War, so that's what built it up. Okay, but those wars are over, supposedly. So we would expect that the military would experience cuts because the wars are over.
Right.
You demobilize, the wars are over.
Right.
That's not true in education. I mean, we haven't reached a point at which we should start educating our young people less. In fact, quite the contrary, we should be educating them more.
Right.
And we've been experiencing cuts in education now over this full 13-year period in which the military was exploding.
Right.
The education budgets were contracting. So that's why, by any standard, the money should be going increasingly to education. But if we're thinking about jobs, there's no comparison.
Okay. And I think that you're involved with a project having to do with green energy. In other words, this would be using renewable parts of our environment, wind, solar, to make energy, largely, and to conserve energy.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, in terms of jobs there, we have jobs that would involve a certain amount of technical research expertise that would be different from teaching, right?
That's right.
Okay, so if we take that $1 million that you're talking about, and how would that work out in this green?
Right, I was going to just get there. So 11 jobs per $1 million for military, 27 for education, about 17 per $1 million for the green economy.
For the green economy.
So you get 50% more jobs by investing in the green economy, as you said, renewable energy, solar, wind, plus energy efficiency.
Right.
About 17 jobs per $1 million of expenditure. 50% more than the military.
Yep.
And of course, these investments we have to make if we are going to take climate science seriously. There's no choice, actually. If we really are actually concerned about security for ourselves, for future generations,
Right.
we have no choice.
Yep.
Because the climate science it's not like there's any serious controversy over the fact that we are facing the potential for an ecological catastrophe unless we control greenhouse gas emissions.
Well, now, how about healthcare?
Healthcare, about 19 jobs per $1 million of expenditure. One thing about the renewable energy work is that you have the same kind of demand for engineering capacity, research and development that you get with the military industry, the weapons industry.
Right. I guess part of the green approach too involves mass transit and other types of transportation alternatives to what we have now that would be in some way consonant with military type hardware research.
Yeah, again, that also would be equivalent.
Yeah.
So in other words, in some of my research, we've actually mapped out job categories. Now, of course, you're not doing the exact same thing.
Yep.
If you were designing new sources of solar energy as opposed to building weapons, it's not the exact same thing, but the same kind of skills, the same kind of electrical engineering and so forth are being utilized.
Right. Now, in terms of these investments in military jobs, is there a downside when wars stop, when military technology isn't any longer used, when it becomes obsolete or really doesn't get the job done anymore? Is there anything that could be said that alternative energy investment would give more economic stability over a long term than weapons investment in a community?
Yeah. I mean, if we think about it, investing in the green, building the green economy, which again is something we have to do. I mean, the Obama administration itself, their own targets for greenhouse gas reduction by the year 2030, so that's only 17 years from now, entails a roughly 35% reduction in our emission standards. An absolute, not a rate of decrease in growth, an absolute 35% decrease. Now that's massive because the population is going to grow.
Right.
And we want there to be the economy growing. We're not saying we're going to lay off everybody.
Yeah.
So we have to learn really, really quickly how to build in far greater efficiency and clean renewable energy. And those are going to be big investments. You also mentioned public transportation. That's a big part of it.
Is there any way to do this without investing hundreds of billions of dollars? How do you achieve these standards? I should say I appreciate you're doing this because I know that you're getting over pneumonia here, so thank you. Yeah.
No, we do have to invest hundreds of billions, but it should be spread out. So I think it should be in the range of about 1% of GDP per year, which is about $150 billion per year.
Per year.
Which isn't that, of course it's a huge number, but it's, the military budget's $700 billion per year.
Okay.
So, and this money in the green economy, all the investments in efficiency, of course, pay for themselves by definition, because that means that we're spending less to get the same benefit in terms of energy.
Now to me, this all sounds great, right? But for a person in a place like Buffalo, New York, that's on its, on its heels economically,
Right.
and they have already the immediate plan for the military to put a drone base, at this Niagara Air Force Base. There's no national, we were talking about this a little bit before, about if there were a national industrial policy
Right.
that was already beginning to look at how will Buffalo and New York benefit and how will they develop green energy or, teaching jobs or something else, then the people locally could say, well, we want that,
Yeah.
we want to build this.
Right.
But there isn't any of that, right?
Yeah.
Do we have an industrial policy?
We do. It's called militarism.
Okay.
What do we mean by industrial policy? People use the term loosely. I think a fair definition is policies that are designed to promote research and development and innovative technologies, and getting those technologies commercialized, moving them into the private economy, but also building up public investments so that things operate more efficiently and we can be more competitive. That would be a rough definition. It's done in this country now through the military. Now, if we can think about, there's been some spectacular successes through military-based industrial policy. Most obviously recently is the internet. Came 100% out of the military. And the internet was subsidized for 35 years before there was any attempt to commercialize it. We should keep that in mind because people think it just popped out of nowhere,
Right.
or maybe Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. But the heavy lifting was done within the military, the serious research. Now, what we really need to think about is something equivalent to that to make solar power and wind power very, very inexpensive. We're not very far from doing that. With the case of wind power, according to the Energy Department itself, its cost level is at rough parity with coal if we're measuring the cost of generating electricity. Solar is more, but solar in a decade could be at parity, and with research and development could be cheaper. Now imagine restructuring our entire energy system, including Buffalo, New York, around clean energy. It is a massive source of job creation and technical innovation. And people in Buffalo should love it. On top of that, as we've been saying, energy efficiency, that's the biggest area of investment. We can think about every single building in Buffalo, New York as getting retrofitted to operate 30% more efficiently. We know that can be done at relatively low cost. That would create, in Buffalo, New York, tens of thousands of construction jobs. Right. And that's what people need.
And so people in Buffalo really need to know what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, thank you. I've said this in a lot of communities. I think people hadn't thought it through that much, but that's the basic truth.
Well, one thing that I think is very pointed toward the military as far as energy policy is concerned is that these drones, as well as a lot of other military basing and troops, are directed around those sources of fossil fuels in the world that are most easily accessible.
Yeah.
And so we're really using our military policy to dig, I'm just saying this, but you could tell me if I'm right. Are we using our military and policy to dig ourselves more deeply into a hole of dependency and destruction of the environment and global warming?
Right.
Rather than getting ourselves out of the hole in this other way. I don't know, maybe there's a better way to put that.
Well, look, a lot of what U.S. militarism has been about for a long time is control of the world's oil supply. Because, you know, the U.S. military planners, certainly coming out of World War II, but even before that, recognized that the world was going to run on fossil fuel.
Yeah.
And oil, most importantly, because cars are going to run on oil. So the U.S. wanted to make sure they had cheap and accessible sources.
Right.
You know, why else would we tolerate the kinds of political regimes that have prevailed in the Middle East for so long?
Right.
So you're right. You know, if you imagine, let's just imagine a world run on 100% renewable energy, 100% solar and wind power. Those would be inevitably smaller scale, locally based. I mean, the solar, if you get the technology, much of it, if not most of it, could be on everybody's rooftop. And I'm not just talking about in sunny places.
Yeah.
I just came back from Germany. Germany generates more energy with solar power than any other country in the world.
Yeah.
Their climate is like the, you know, Northeast U.S.
This latitude. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not Florida.
Yeah.
I can tell you, it was snowy when I was in Berlin.
Well, so what does someone in Buffalo now do about this? Do they say bring the drones and we'll change the policy? I mean, what? Because bringing the drones really isn't that digging us deeper into the hole?
It is. I think that look, there's a lot of reasons to be against drones, and we haven't talked about the military or ethical reasons, and we haven't talked about the use of what drones are being used for.
Right.
All of which are also areas of my concern, though not areas of my specific expertise. Right. But if we're thinking about drones as a jobs policy, it is a bad jobs policy.
Okay.
You can say we love drones, we've got to have drones. Okay, that's another argument. If we want to talk about it as a jobs policy, that much I can tell you, it's a bad jobs policy.
Okay. Now, you've been writing about this for you know, at least 5 years, about the whole benefit to shifting money out of the military into these other areas. What do you think is the point of resistance, you know, within politicians or within the business community, you know, labor, within the general public, toward thinking about things in this way?
Yeah.
Where's the obstacle? Because what you're saying seems very commonsensical.
Yeah, well, I think it's different in different communities. I think that obviously the military industrial complex, the weapons manufacturers, they want to keep making money manufacturing weapons. I don't think they care particularly whether it's drones or if it's F-35s or F-16s. This is their business.
Right.
And if drones are the hottest thing, then they'll build drones. In 7-8 years, they'll be maybe something else.
Right.
But that's one area. I mean, for labor, obviously they're concerned about jobs. And we've had a jobs crisis now in this country, relatively short-term jobs crisis since the financial crisis of 2007 to 2009. So it's understandable that they would say, we need jobs and we don't want to hear your speeches. The stuff you're talking about isn't going to happen anyway. So we need to get jobs in any way we can get them.
Okay.
And that's a familiar argument. On the other hand, when I was in Germany just last week, the conference was sponsored by labor in Germany and the US, AFL-CIO. So AFL-CIO is, obviously there's a lot of factions, but they are more and more open to thinking about long-term strategic vision and not just how do we plug the hole for the next 6 months. Because it's true, even for the next 6 months. If we put the money in Buffalo into rebuilding the public schools instead of having cuts, you would get more jobs in Buffalo
Right.
than doing the drones. I'm
Right.
not, so that we don't have to be thinking 25 years.
Yeah.
I'm talking about next month. Moreover, if we were to say we're going to double the number of buses, public transportation in Buffalo, the next 6 months, we would get more jobs than putting it into drones.
Right. So really, what it's down to the public, isn't it?
Yeah, the public.
To make these demands.
Yes, the public does need to think about it, be educated,
Right.
and be willing to speak out.
Yeah. Because of the layers above the average person have all their resistances built in. Am I talking about this correctly?
I think so. I think, well, I know with the latest version of our study that you were nice enough to cite came out, last year. We were attacked vehemently by the lobbying groups for the military.
Really?
Oh, not just, first of all, they didn't bother to criticize any of the detailed research,
Okay.
which to me says they know that it's right. If they saw a major flaw in the research, they would have pounced on it. Of course, these people are idiots. Look,
Right.
they never did that. Basically, what they did was, try to mock me and my co-author Heidi, Garrett-Peltier, saying, "Well, these are professors up in Amherst, Massachusetts. What do they know about reality?" So yeah, and those people, that lobbying community, has a huge amount of power. In
What groups said that about what you?
I was afraid you were going to ask me that because I can't remember their name right now.
Did they represent what industry or industry?
Yeah, they were. I think it's called American Aeronautics. It's kind of, they try to be somewhat neutral, but basically they're weapons manufacturers.
I see. Okay, and so they're a lobbying organization.
Yeah.
So they read a lot.
Yeah. Well, they read this because this was, direct challenge to their
Yes.
way of thinking.
Yep.
Because they come out on this point where we started. You've got to do this because it creates jobs.
Yep.
Okay, it creates jobs. And my point again to them was, you're right. It does create jobs. That's just not the relevant question.
Yes.
So once they saw my argument, they really didn't have a counter other than to try to make me seem like some idiot who's a professor who doesn't really understand how the world works.
So you took that as being a compliment.
I don't know. I didn't worry about it one way or the other, except the one point, as I mentioned, if they saw that my research was really wrong,
Right.
they would have, they would have blogged like lunatics on that and just saying, "Oh, this guy doesn't know how to count."
Yeah.
Since they didn't say that, I think they know that I do know how to count.
But their primary audience, when they took this critique of you,
Yeah,
was the Congress.
absolutely.
Yep. So this was, basically a preemptive strike
Yeah,
against this information to essentially render it worthless
yeah,
in political discourse.
yeah.
Right.
And it doesn't, you know how these debates go. They're conducted at a very low level. It's
Yeah.
not like you say, "Oh, yeah, look, you have new research? Oh, let's take a look at this. And let's compare it with somebody else and let's try to figure out who's really right."
Yeah.
That's not how, no, it's just slogans flying back and forth.
Yep.
So in my case, I don't see my role as contributing another slogan or two. So all I can do is try to provide serious research that will stand up to scrutiny.
Right.
So I'm perfectly willing to debate with an opponent who wants to show me where I'm wrong. Perfectly willing
Yep.
to. And I'm confident that I can prevail in such
Yeah.
a situation.
Right.
But if someone wants to just cast aspersions, slurs, what's really the point?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. But I think that it's a very good indicator for people who will watch this interview that you're on to something.
Yeah.
That, I think, when it brings that kind of response,
Yeah.
is a very, very strong point in your favor. I know that the ethics of a job, let's just say making pencils versus making bullets, is something that there isn't any kind of economic analysis of. And but I think very often there are people on the left, for instance, who will say, well, in Germany, the making poison gas was a job for the ovens. And so, well, of course, a lot of people are very offended, by that statement.
It's true.
To think that we're making bombs to protect America, you're telling us it's like making gas to kill millions of Jews. And so there's less, oh, well, we can't even go there. But is there an ethical content to jobs? Is there any kind of discourse about that you know of, or what your thoughts are about that?
Well, I think that there's different dimensions of ethical content. Just for in and of itself, jobs having the capacity to support yourself, to support a family, to live at a decent living standard, to participate in your community, all of which are connected to having a job, is a fundamental ethical feature of a decent society. So that's why I'm committed more broadly to the idea of full employment, because the idea of full employment means everybody has that right.
Yeah.
Now, then the next question you were asking is about making poison gas or drones versus making solar panels. There's also an ethical content to that. I mean, drones are designed to kill people while not putting yourself at any risk.
Right.
That's what they are. And we know that we in the U.S. are doing it. And of course, the policy in the U.S. now of doing that is not only ethically repugnant to me, but it's also counterproductive. It's only creating more terrorists. I mean, come on. You have these things flying around in communities where 99.9% of the people, if not more, are innocent.
Right.
There may be one or two really bad guys in that community.
Yeah.
But if you are making an entire community in, say, Pakistan into victims, is that really going to help our long-term security? Of course not.
Yeah. So you're saying too that when a person has a job, they have an emotional attachment to it, and that there might be some kind of emotional burden for one type of work as compared to an emotional enthusiasm for another.
Well, I think, I can't really speak to this that well because I haven't talked to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I have talked to some people about it. Because we all need jobs. There's a few people that are very, very rich and don't need jobs. Right. They live off of their coupon clipping.
Yep.
99.8% of the world's population, thereabouts, they need jobs, or they need somebody in their family to be working at a steady job. Okay, so everybody needs jobs, and if the best job you can get is building drones, then I think people are going to internalize that and either say, look, it's not my decision what they do with the drones. Yeah. I'm just earning my living. Yeah. On the other hand, if people had the opportunity to say, I'm doing something worthwhile. I'm helping to build a new rail car. I'm helping to, children get educated. I'm the bus driver at the school. Yeah. These are things that are uplifting, and you don't have to be defensive about it.
Yeah. But it's also, I guess you could say, I just thought about it, that I might have my drone job, but in fact, by me having this, it's possible I'm depriving other people of work altogether.
Yeah.
Because more for the same amount of money.
That's right.
Bob and Mary down the street who were teachers, now they could go back to work.
Right. I mean, again, that's not an abstract proposition. That's happening now, because under sequestration, there are going to be big cuts in social spending.
Yeah.
And even if we get out of the specific sequestration agreement that we've fallen into now, the alternatives that are being suggested by the Obama administration are not all that much better.
Yeah. Okay.
In some ways, they're worse. So, you know, we're looking at a situation in this country in which you have very loud, vociferous voices saying, we must not cut the military. Must not.
Yeah.
Because we have to be the strongest superpower.
Yeah.
These same voices say, we must cut government spending. They also then say, we've already raised taxes on the rich enough.
Yeah.
So where are the cuts coming from?
Yeah.
They're gonna, and you know, the only big other things that we spend on are education and healthcare.
Yeah.
There's no other choice. There's no other place to take the money from.
But it's also true that the military spending has its own kind of racial bias too, in the sense that these are jobs probably not going to go as much to low-income people of color as would education jobs or health care jobs, right?
Well, I think it's fair to say that you do have a good proportion of jobs at all levels within the military that are for minorities, African Americans. It has been a good source of opportunity for it's, you know, that's just true. Now, it's also true in the areas you mentioned in education and healthcare, but in that one realm, I don't think we can criticize the military.
Okay.
I think the military.
I guess I'm talking about the military hardware business.
Oh, military.
As distinct from the overall military.
Okay, yeah, so the military hardware business.
In other words, if you get in the drone business.
Yeah, no, I haven't studied that specifically, the demographics of who's working in the military hardware. My guess it's going to be far less racially diverse than the military itself.
Yes, yeah, because I guess I was getting too narrow in that, but I was thinking more about the technological parts of it. Yeah. Is there anything else about this that you would like to say before we conclude?
Well, I think this is a great project, and I think that I know that you are going to explore all aspects of drones. The parts about jobs and industrial policy is just one element of it. I think that we have to, where I was speaking before and saying, we have to think about just being smart about what this new tactic of warfare is doing, because it's so easy to terrorize an entire community.
Or a country.
Or a country, just having the planes buzzing around.
Right.
And that's basically telling them, you know, we're tougher than you, and don't mess around with us. But who are we speaking to here? We're not speaking to the 5 people who are terrorists, and I'm not saying there are 5 people who are terrorists, but let's say there are. We're speaking to every single family that they're seeing these things buzz around. The drones don't discriminate.
Right. And in these areas that are resource rich, would you say that the drones will be used to try to extract more and more, oil or minerals? Or
I think that the drones are going to, unless we control it, the drones are going to be an increasingly popular tactic of warfare, terrorism, our own terrorism, intimidation. So what do we need to intimidate countries about more than anything else? We need to control resources.
Yeah.
So yes, drones will be buzzing around whenever we need to take control of a territory.
Yeah. And going back to the beginning, it seems to me that what you were saying was that unless we shift away from this type of military obsession and behavior, there's no way we can deal with climate and global warming. Am I correct in saying that we have a limited amount of money? We believe we have a limited amount of money.
Yeah.
And if we believe that, we have to make a different choice. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that we obviously have limited resources. And as long as we are fixated on a fossil fuel-based economy and a military sector, a main purpose of which is defending our control over fossil fuels.
Mm-hmm.
As long as we're fixated there, we'll never solve climate change.
Yeah. Okay.
By contrast, if we did really commit and put money into investing in renewable energy and efficiency, that would be our fundamental source of security. And by the way, I don't just mean here in the United States. Think about Africa,
Mm-hmm.
that is still very, very poor and requires generations of development.
Mm-hmm.
Think how beneficial it would be for them to entirely skip the development of a fossil fuel economy in the way that we have.
Yeah.
I myself have done advising work in Africa, and the biggest constraint on economic growth, and again, not talking about fancy stuff, day-to-day obvious things, the biggest constraint on economic growth in sub-Saharan African countries is the price of oil. Of course, not the oil exporters,
Right.
but most of them are oil importers.
Yep.
And that they have to organize their whole entire economy around, bringing in enough resources to run things, given they're handed a price of oil. Now, let's say that they could have solar panels on every roof. And let's say they had really well-developed public transportation systems. Maybe let's even imagine them having electric cars. They would skip the entire fossil fuel infrastructure in the way that right now they are leapfrogging ahead with telecommunications, that they are basically developing telecommunication systems around cell phone technologies and avoiding the whole traditional infrastructure that we have.
Of wires, right?
Right.
Yep, right. Okay. Well, this is very good. Thank you.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
thanks very much.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.